Today, it was not a little boy at all. This was the first atomic bomb in history. The moment it explodes, life will change completely in the 7th largest city in Japan, which will be a part of hell. And one of the biggest tragedies in history will begin, which will be known as the Hiroshima tragedy. That morning, a large number of Hiroshima residents were in the streets, going to work or school, participating in expanding roads in preparation for a possible American invasion. Some of them noticed the plane, Enola Gay, which was AB-29. Some of them saw it in the sky. The plane was walking and strutting in the sky of the city. The truth is, no one cared that much. They thought, a plane like any other plane. Very few people could understand that this is an American plane. Also, the raid sirens did not go off. Even if it was a raid, it would never be a single pilot. Usually, a huge squadron of planes bombing the city, not one plane, and they bomb with hundreds of bombs. We'd see rain of gunpowder. Also, Hiroshima, unlike other cities in Japan, had never experienced raids before. In a way, many of the city's residents were convinced that it would remain safe. It is impossible for the Americans to ever bomb Hiroshima. This is because a large number of Japanese immigrants to America are originally residents of Hiroshima. That's all besides a famous rumor, at the time, saying, President Truman's aunt lived in Hiroshima. This rumor was very widespread among the people. Thus, no one was interested in this plane. At exactly 8:15, my friend, the bomb is dropped, specifically on a hospital called Shima. Suddenly, a dazzling light radiates across the city of Hiroshima, a light like the flash of a million cameras. It was all in the morning as well, as if you were seeing day above day. As described by the survivors who were 8 kilometers away from the explosion point, they said that they felt as if they were looking into the sun. Light, as I saw in Oppenheimer, without any sound, in less than a second, a fireball is formed with a diameter of up to 250 meters. Its temperature ranges from 3000 to 4000 degrees Celsius, a ball that devours all the air around it. Its flames burn everyone within 3000 meters. This ball, my friend, killed 70,000 people in one moment. Most of them died without understanding what was happening and realizing its last moment of his life. Some of them evaporated from the surface of the earth, and nothing remained in their place except their shadow. In a phenomenon known as nuclear shadows, Shima Hospital, where the nuclear bomb fell, disappeared with those who were in it. Nothing remained from them at all. The next moment, a terrible explosion wave erupts. Every building's glass in the city within a 2-kilometer radius was destroyed. Let me tell you, the glass of houses 16 kilometers away from the bomb was destroyed. People felt the bomb from 60 kilometers away. In an instant, the city's residents who were left alive found themselves in the middle of a storm of flying building blocks. Blocks that are on fire and taking out everything in front of them. Some estimates say that these inflamed lumps caused 30% of the deaths and injuries. Then suddenly, the wave ends, and calm prevails over the city of Hiroshima. But it is not the calm of the end. Rather, it is the calm of the beginning of the tragedy. The first thing the residents of Hiroshima face after the bomb is fire. The fireball caused a huge fire that reached every place in Hiroshima. The fire that doubled its spread and strength, the blow of strong wind over the city, spreading fire everywhere. And at the moment when Hiroshima was burning, thousands were emerging from under the rubble, trying to understand what was happening. Tens of thousands of people rising from the rubble, like zombies. They go out walking in the middle of a whole city that is burning. Most of them have terrible burns, of course. None of them understood anything. Many of them were difficult to recognize their features. After the fire burned much of their faces. They all have one goal in mind. To reach any of the city's rivers quickly because of the immense heat they felt, to ease a little the flames of their burning bodies. When they reach the river, they see an unpleasant surprise. The rivers also turned into fire, because of the blocks of wood that flew from the burned houses, the houses that were on the banks of rivers. Here, tens of thousands of human beings crowd together, they want somewhere to put their burning bodies. All this in the middle of fire, burnt wood, demolished houses, and the smell of smoke. Around these people, thousands of burned or floating corpses. Many of the people who jumped into the river from the bridge didn't know how to swim, they just went down to escape from the fire. When they went down, they did not come up again. They drowned to death. Other people got into the water tanks and swimming pools, crowded in, and because of how tired and weak their bodies were, they couldn't get out, and they drowned. Everyone was looking for help, but who helps who? Everyone had his own tragedy, and the savior was the victim. And whoever you try to seek help from, you will find that he himself is in need of help. That if you found anyone too. About half an hour later, rain falls on the city of Hiroshima. Nice, abo mead. Water will relieve them. No, my friend, it is not sweet at all. This may be the strangest water that has ever descended on human beings in history. Dark black rain saturated with ash, smoke, and radiation particles in the atmosphere, radioactive rain. Some people who got this rain on their skin, got burns and injuries. With the increase in fires everywhere, and the absence of anyone who can extinguish them, the residents of Hiroshima begin trying to get out of the city. And they go towards the hills beyond its borders. A procession of people forms, with only one expression on their faces, which was shock. Walking almost naked, after their clothes were burned. No one was shy, because no one had anything like this in their brain at all. Secondly, because the appearance of the skin was not of a normal color, the skin that was visible from under the clothes was falling off and bleeding. Tens of thousands of people instinctively raise their hands up, to avoid friction between wounds. Tens of thousands walking among corpses everywhere, raising their hands as if they are surrendering to an enemy they do not see. Large groups of people have lost their sight, they were looking for someone to help them and guide them to the exit. Even those who saw, did not know where. People running and calling for water, they want to drink and extinguish the flames on their bodies. The journey that many people weren't able to complete and will fall in the way due to fatigue and surrender to their fate and die. While Hiroshima was suffering, no one in the capital, Tokyo, understood exactly what was happening. Suddenly, phone communications with Hiroshima were completely cut off. The radio line is not available and the telegraphs are not working. Railway signals are off, and military communications are cut off. An army unit in a nearby city was assigned to send someone to Hiroshima to see what happened there. At 1 o'clock noon, a telegraph arrived saying just one sentence: Hiroshima was completely wiped out with one bomb, and fires are everywhere. Of course, my friend, the officials didn't understand, how can one bomb wipe out an entire city? There is no such thing in the world. When the 6 o'clock news broadcast on Japanese radio, it only said a little piece of news that some flammable bombs were dropped on Hiroshima, and were calculating the damages. We cannot imagine that one bomb can do all this. And 1 a.m. Tokyo time, 17 hours after the bomb was dropped, US President Harry Truman comes out delivering his speech, in which he will announce to the world the dropping of the first atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. And actually explaining to the Japanese what happened. Why is it possible for a single bomb to cause such destruction? But despite all this, after a commission from Tokyo arrived in Hiroshima, it arrived the next day to assess the damage and see the city. There is nothing but a pile of ashes. There was, my friend, very clear confusion and denial of the Japanese leadership. Some leaders were talking about steadfastness and continuing the fight. This state of denial, my friend, unfortunately does not last. Because it takes another slap that is very severe from reality, a new disaster will strike Japan within just 72 hours. When the second bomb falls on the city of Nagasaki, and the tragedy is repeated, for the next day, the Japanese government would clearly announce, free from confusion and hesitation, its surrender. My friend, let me take you back to Hiroshima. Specifically the day after the bombing, August 7, 1945. The fire died down and the smoke began to disappear. The crowds that had left outside began to return again to record their testimonies about the city that became a field of ashes. The city that became the scene of many painful scenes. For example, there was a group of people trying to find their family and loved ones and see what happened to their homes. Some of them, my friend, wanted neither good news nor bad news. They want news, we want to understand. They examine the bodies, and their best hope is to identify them. Other people desperately try to find any food. They have had more than 24 hours without a single bite. There was a general state of thirst. Some people, due to extreme thirst, began to drink from the tanks in which the bodies were drowned. Of course, this is besides the thousands of injured people in a state of fatigue waiting for any help. But, my friend, this help didn't arrive. Then a rumor came out among people that oils relieve pain. Everyone kept looking for any oil to cover the burnt parts of their bodies: food oil, castor oil, even car oils. The group that survived from police and army soldiers were trying to collect the remains of bodies from the roads and burn them. Another one of the terrifying scenes was a scene of angry crowds holding 2 Americans who survived the bombing. And they torture them to death. ABO Mead, 1 second. What brought the Americans here? 12, my friend. Among the victims of the atomic bomb were American pilots. They were taken prisoners days before the bomb was dropped. Half of them died at the moment of the bombing. At least 2 people died from beatings at the hands of the people. But the rest died over the coming days after that. One of the hospitals that survived the bombing and was not subjected to major damage was the Transportation Authority Hospital. One of its doctors was Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, who was interested in monitoring what was happening and writing it in his diary. After that, it will be a very important reference to know what happened to the people in Hiroshima. What makes, my friend, these remarks are important, is that between 300 doctors, which is the number of doctors in all of Hiroshima, only 28 doctors from them survived. One of them was this doctor, who provided in his diary an accurate description and important observation of events. How, for example, did the first traces of radiation appear? The first trace of radiation appeared when suddenly the infected people relieved themselves dozens of times per night. Unfortunately, some of the patients needed to go to the bathroom more than 50 or 60 times. Their feces were all blood, and no one understood why it was happening. The initial belief was that this was often dysentery, and doctors began isolating everyone who showed these symptoms. As the second day passed, stranger symptoms began to appear. People started coming to the hospital with strange blisters on their skin, and they had bleeding gums. The strange thing is that these people survived the bombing. Their burns were minor, if they were injured at all. Gums. The strange thing is that these people survived the bombing. Their burns were minor, if they were injured at all. These people are supposed to be okay, but over time, symptoms began to develop, their temperature began to increase, they experienced severe fatigue and vomit blood. Within a day or 2, they died. The doctors, my friend, did not understand these people were supposed to have survived the bombing. What happened to them to die like this? After 4 or 5 days, new symptoms began to appear, purple spots on the skin that do not hurt. But it is itchy, their skin eats them to scratch it. This was a very important sign, because anyone who had these spots died after 2 or 3 days. Hiroshima has become a city of terrified people. A city where people take off their clothes every now and then. They are looking to see if there are stains or not. If the answer is, there are no spots, this means that his life extended at least a new day. A new day of life, but it is also a new day of anxiety if these spots would appear on his body later. A new day in a life with a completely unknown fate. But if the answer is, yes, there are spots on your back, this means certain death. All that, my friend, the doctors are at a loss, because they have never seen symptoms like this before. Dr. Hachiya records that at this moment, began to suspect that the US might have used a bacterial or chemical bomb on Hiroshima. 1 second, ABO Mead. What bacteria and chemicals? President Truman said, guys, this is an atomic bomb. My friend, don't be so cruel. Hiroshima was isolated from everything that happened around it. No newspapers reached it and the radio towers there have been destroyed. This has left its residents still unaware of what weapon was thrown at them. While the whole world is talking about the atomic bomb, no one in Hiroshima knows that people are talking about it. And that they became the talk of the world, and the world's first victims of the atomic bomb. Dr. Hachiya records that the first time he knew that what was thrown at them is called an atomic bomb, was a week after the bombing, when one of the doctors came to help from a nearby city, and commented saying that the atomic bomb was a very terrible thing. Here, the rumor is confirmed that America used this terrible weapon on the city of Hiroshima, to make life in this city before the bomb a chapter, and what's after another chapter entirely. Not only in Hiroshima, in the whole world. The new chapter will witness Hiroshima become a city uninhabitable for decades. On August 15, 1945, for the first time in their history, the Japanese heard the voice of the Japanese emperor while delivering a surrender speech. When some residents of Hiroshima heard the speech, through the few radios that managed to pick up the signal, many of the people of Hiroshima were crying bitterly. Not because Japan lost, nor because Japan surrendered, but because if this surrender letter was only 9 days earlier, none of this would have happened. It could have saved their fate, which is not only terrifying, but also unknown and incomprehensible. Until now, we don't know where these diseases and symptoms will end. The issue is not just a tragedy in the loss of family, loved ones, housing, and home. This is a future where every sentence ends in a question mark. We don't know what will happen to us in the coming days. Will we wake up alive or dead? Question marks were not only from the people of Hiroshima, but it was also from those who threw the bomb at them. Let me tell you that until the time Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, no one knew exactly the effects of exposure to this huge amount of radiation. Humans and the environment after being exposed to this amount of radiation, how would they look like? And what effect it had, not only at the moment of the explosion but in the days, months, and years that follow. This knowledge absent from the world, we will begin to know it little by little. The people of Hiroshima will begin to know it before anyone else with every new symptom that appears on those infected. For example, you have purple spots that mean death. During autopsies, they discover that it is a symptom of internal bleeding that happens to organs whose cells are destroyed by radiation. After a week, a new symptom begins to appear. People start losing hair on their heads. Hair falls out for no apparent reason. And after a very few days, these people also die. Once again, panic reigns in Hiroshima. Every time a symptom appears, it leads to death. People start to pull their hair and their kids' hair to check whether their hair is falling out or not. On September 3, 1945, the Japanese professor, Dr. Masao Suzuki, arrived at Hiroshima. Sorry, my friend, this is the Hiroshima accent. This doctor was experimenting on rabbits by exposing them to radiation. He had important studies in the field of radiation effects. And here the few doctors left in Hiroshima thought that they could find a solution for these people on the hands of this distinguished professor who has done a lot of research related to exposure to radiation, and could easily prescribe treatment for them and stop this cruel wheel of death. But, my friend, he shocked them. He said, there is nothing we can do for the injured except provide them with rest and good food. That's all, doctor, that's all. The idea, my friend, is that even rest and eating well were very difficult in Hiroshima. What comfort in a country where most of the population has died? What fresh food in a city that is one step away from famine? This simply means surrender to death. In short, my friend, the only person in Japan who could have had a solution to this problem said that there was no solution. When the first foreign aid arrived to this stricken city, through the Red Cross mission, they said the situation was very difficult, and demanded the largest amount of medical supplies as quickly as possible. Journalists from the Allies countries begin arriving to the city and witness daily deaths and the strange effects of the bomb. European and American newspapers publish that something strange is happening in Hiroshima. There is something mysterious that the media calls the atomic bomb plague. When the Americans felt global pressure, their generals began to reassure the people, okay, the bomb is done with its effect, and no one will die from it again. This is the news the world was waiting to hear. But of course, my friend, unfortunately this does not happen. With Japanese newspapers publishing the tragic news coming from Hiroshima, General Douglas MacArthur, American military governor of Japan, who was present after Japan's surrender and its occupation by America, he warned Japanese newspapers against hot headlines and the misuse of the Hiroshima crisis. We, Mr. General, will say more delicate articles. An American bomb lights up the sky of Hiroshima in a morning carnival, illuminating the faces of the population. American doctors recommend using radiation to freshen the skin and increase fertility. How will we say it, sir? How will we say it? You made a disaster. You committed a humanitarian crime that to this day you didn't apologize for. What added salt to the wound, that on September 19, 1945, Japanese newspapers were censored, and were prohibited to publish any information about the atomic bomb. But when John Hersey, a New Yorker journalist, visits Hiroshima, and writes an article of 31,000 words, it was published in an entire issue of the magazine in August 1946, being the strange irony, that when the Americans see the article in their newspapers, they got to know the details of the Hiroshima tragedy while the Japanese, who were hit by the bomb, didn't know these details. Most Japanese people didn't know what happened in Hiroshima, because their newspapers in Japan were forbidden from publishing about it. There was a complete media blockade there. For example, you have the Japanese director Akira Iwasaki. Of course, this is not Akira Kurosawa, the well-known Japanese director. I'm a member of a cinema club. You see, I see Abbas Kiarostami. When you see the first Abbas, you can talk to me. This director, my dear, visited Hiroshima, and recorded footage of the devastation that occurred there, and the deplorable humanitarian situation. But unfortunately, these tapes were confiscated, and went to the American military archives. They were classified there as top secret, and didn't come to light until many years later. Also, the research unit at the Riken Institute in Tokyo, that was studying the effects of nuclear radiation, faced orders to dismantle it and destroy its factories, under the pretext of preventing Japan from arming itself in the future. But of course, my friend, the Americans' greatest concern at that time simply, pragmatically and clearly, was not to distort America's great victory, and not to distort the amazing invention that brought absolute power to them. The power with which they will rule the world. And sir, my friend, as the days pass, and as life slowly returned to Hiroshima, and as the people were trying to forget what happened to them, they convinced themselves that all this is long gone history and life will go on. Other unpleasant surprises appear for the people of Hiroshima, the first of which is cancer. First, my friend, you have a major disaster and huge fires, and people have died. After that, people would go to the bathroom 10, 20, 30, 50, or 60 times. After that, the spots that mean death within days. After that, hair loss occurs, which means death within days. Enough. All good. No more traces of the bomb. Years later we find cancers. The percentage of getting leukemia for people who were close to the center of the bomb rose to be 50 times the normal rate. Not only leukemia, there were other cancers, thyroid, breast, and lung cancer that's incidence increases more than 3 times. Of course, the suffering that follows is psychological suffering. Over the years, the demographic composition of Hiroshima has changed. Hiroshima, at the time of the bombing, had a population of 340,000 people. Of this population, between 100 and 140,000 people died as a result of the atomic bomb. It was noticed that many of the 340,000 people were either recruits or strangers to the city. They also left her after the war ended. After the war, people from other cities began to come and go to Hiroshima. What brought them? ABO Mead. They didn't find anything other than this. This is a city just hit by a bomb. Hasty, my friend. Hasty and happy and sad stories alike. ABO Mead, why the shaming? A city in crisis means job opportunities. When the grocer dies, the doctor dies, and the engineer dies, there is room for employment. This is a black comedy. Also, my friend, think that this is a disaster-stricken city. Meaning, it needs reconstruction, and that means work and money. Changing the demographic composition made the bombing survivors, who were in the city at the time of the bomb, and are still living to this day, were called hibakusha, and they are a minority among the new population. Not only did they not see what they saw, they also did not hear about it because of the media embargo that was in place in Japan. Dozens of hibakusha begin to live in a dark side that no one knows anything about. The horrific psychological impact that tens of thousands of infected people went through, darkness coming from the psychological effect of what they saw with their own eyes. This is a real trauma, my friend, losing your family, your home, and you are burned and left on the verge of a pit of death, living years of stress and anxiety if you develop symptoms that kill you after a few days. This trauma still lives on. You don't know what you will end up with. Tens of thousands of infected people, many of whom had obvious physical deformities, unfortunately, they began to be treated as outcasts everywhere. Who would marry someone who has these fires? Again, we still do not know what effect this has on the children, on the succession. These people were rejected and forbidden from entering public places. The people who came to the city after that were avoiding seeing the victims of the explosion, because their appearance is depressing and uncomfortable. Of course, the business owners refuse to give them jobs because they get tired quickly, and they always need health follow-up in hospitals. The situation of girls and women who were exposed to these deformities was much worse than this. They paid a much more expensive price. Some of them were no longer able to go out into the street at all. They stayed in their homes for years because they were ashamed of their appearance. Some people refrained from giving birth to children because they were afraid that the children would appear deformed. The effect of radiation, my dear, was not only physical. Radiation left the residents of Hiroshima with a great feeling of guilt because of their actions when the bomb was dropped. For example, who did not stop to help someone, the one who tried and ran away, and left someone calling for help, or the one who abandoned his sisters and family under the influence of panic. Also, suicide cases among hibakusha increased. Some of them were unable to adapt to their injuries and deformities, or with the new reality in which every day there is a fear of death, if any new traces of radiation appear. This is besides their feeling that they had turned into laboratory rats from the first moment. The process was completely devoid of humanity. Even after the disaster happened, when the Americans set up a lab in the city to study the effects of the atomic bomb, and study its consequences on the victims. Every death in Hiroshima becomes an experience with routine procedures, instead of a momentous event, where we stand with sadness. When a person dies, suddenly the military jeep belonging to the US forces deployed there appears to ask his family to hand over his body for autopsy for medical research purposes. After many years, when the body samples returned to Japan again, the Japanese writer Takashi Ito went to see them in the laboratories of Hiroshima University. He wrote about tens of thousands of internal organs preserved in formalin, and feeling sad these organs might belong to people he knew, and he dealt with them. The people of Hiroshima, my dear, didn't stay alone much. There were global campaigns in solidarity with them. Some of them were in America itself. For example, in 1949, when the American journalist Norman Cousin returns and publishes a report on the horrors he saw, published in the Saturday Review, the article gained widespread sympathy at the time. It opened the eyes of Americans more to the catastrophe caused by the bomb. Norman Cousin was not satisfied with the article. He launched a number of huge campaigns in solidarity with the people of Hiroshima, like the Atomic Bomb Orphans campaign, that drew the world's attention to the presence of 4,000 orphaned children as a result of the atomic bomb. He also succeeded in working on a project that got American citizens to cover the expenses of 400 of these children until they finish their education and rely on themselves. Not only that, Kazan launched a project he called Hiroshima Maidens. Hiroshima Maidens, he called for the treatment of girls whose faces were disfigured by the bomb and getting them free plastic surgery in America. And indeed, one of the medical institutions in New York adopted this campaign, and the victim girls travel and spend months being treated for the deformities in America. In April 1947, Shinzo Hamae is elected mayor of Hiroshima. This man had strong plans not only to remove Hiroshima from its unfortunate reality, but also to transform it into a global symbol. The mayor of Hiroshima had a vision that what happened in the city was bigger than just being specific to it. This is an event that the whole world needs to hear about and learn from. Also, recovering Hiroshima from its destruction was not only important for its residents, but important for the whole world to realize the horror and ugliness of the atomic bomb and no one uses it again. In 1949, the city's mayor wrote a message of peace from the people of Hiroshima to the whole world. The letter was signed by 110,000 Hibakusha, the indigenous people who attended the bomb explosion. This message was carried by the American journalist Norman Cousin, who delivered it to the Secretary General of the United Nations. Is he a secretary or a general? ABO Meade. The message said the people of Hiroshima don't want anything from the world other than him being a symbol of peace, and for humanity to know what happened to them to make sure that this never happens again. At the same time, the Japanese parliament passed a law, declaring the city of Hiroshima a symbol of world peace. He begins to transform the drop site of the atomic bomb, the hypocenter, into a global symbol. The Peace Park is built on this center, on an area of 120,000 square meters. One of its most important landmarks is the Peace Dome. The dome was an industrial exhibition building, which was made of concrete. At the moment of the bombing, its location was exactly under the center of the bomb. This dome miraculously escaped destruction, and this dome remained standing alone like a sad, speechless witness that attended everything from beginning to end. A witness standing in the middle of a city that has become ruins. Today, UNESCO considers the dome one of the World Heritage Symbols. In the middle of the park, we see the memorial to the victims of the nuclear bomb. Inside it contains the names of all known victims of the bomb. On this monument is written, "Let all the souls here rest in peace, for we shall not repeat the evil." Over time, Hiroshima has not only turned into a city calling for peace, and now reminds the world of the danger of nuclear weapons, rather, it has launched huge initiatives to spread the culture of peace around the world. It launches initiatives to confront problems such as poverty and illiteracy. These initiatives are so large that the Baptists for Peace initiative had more than 8,200 cities participate in it, in more than 166 countries around the world. Even today, millions of people visit Hiroshima every year to see how it transformed from a completely destroyed city, to a city where every corner has a garden, and all its streets carry one word: peace. My friend, this only leaves us with the question, if the world will learn from this harsh lesson, of this long and painful suffering. Maybe the world was lucky that for 78 years, and despite all the enormous conflicts, this destructive weapon wasn't used again. But, my friend, although this weapon hadn't been used, but its production did not stop. The state of greed to produce more of this weapon has not yet ended. According to the UN, the world today contains more than 22,000 atomic bombs. So we wonder if the owners of these bombs will one day come and use them. Or did Hiroshima and Nagasaki carve an eternal lesson in history? The lesson of their pain, suffering, and tragedy. In the end, my friend, I don't want you to worry, I want to reassure you. If these bombs aren't used, we will keep waiting. If it strikes, 22,000 atomic bombs will surely end our existence. We will no longer be there to feel them, We will never know. This is an optimistic message. And in case you want to live in a state of denial, you have the Elder here and you can entertain yourself with it. There are old episodes and new ones, and sources to check out below, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Do you know, my friend, that until 2017 there was no law criminalizing the use of the atomic bomb? Not surprised, abo Mead, as there are no laws criminalizing war, but, my friend, thank God, in 2017 we have a law criminalizing the use of the atomic bomb. Because countries that have atomic bombs are very afraid that they will break the law. As if we'll have the time to hold who used it accountable. We'll put him in the naughty corner. Because he violated the